Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about 5 common arrow building mistakes. Mistake number 1 is selecting the right spine. So this can be a little tricky, especially with some of the different components out there now for arrows. But you want to probably go on a little bit of the stiff side compared to being a little bit too weak. If you have too weak of a spine, it's going to be really tough to get that arrow to tune. So let's say you look at the chart and you think it's about a 340 spine or a 350 spine, but you're going to add a little bit of extra weight to the front, I would highly recommend going to more of a 300 spine arrow. But you don't want to go to 250 because you might be just getting added weight at that point and it's too stiff for your setup. Which leads me to arrow mistake number 2, your components. So this is a big one, especially now. There's lots of different components out there, and there's better components, especially for 4mm arrows. But if you are adding a bunch of weight to the front of your arrow, that is going to weaken that shaft. So you're going to need to be stiffer. So if you're somebody who's adding 50 to 75 grains up front to that arrow, that's why I recommend going to that little bit of stiffer shaft to make sure that you're going to be safe adding that extra weight to the front of the shaft. Now, if you're somebody who runs a lighted knock or adding wraps or extra fletching to the back of the arrow, that will stiffen up your arrow. And I highly recommend running good components. So you got a good lighted knock, one that's got a good string fit, and also one that's actually going to work for you. And up front, I personally like to run a titanium. This is a collar with a half out insert. That is what I like to run. That collar is going to strengthen up the front of that arrow, so when the force of the arrow hits and the impact, it's going to help make sure that it's not damaging the front of your arrow. Every time you impact something, it's just going to strengthen it a little bit more. So common arrow mistake building number 3 is the correct length of your arrow. So I personally like to go about the middle of the riser. If you're somebody who's shooting a giant fixed blade broadhead, then obviously you're going to have to be out in front of your riser. But the longer you go, that's going to just be extra added shaft that you might not need. So I personally like to go to about the center of the riser, just so that way I don't have extra added weight to that arrow that might not be doing anything for my setup. And then also with that length, if you're somebody who's cutting the length off of your arrow, you want to check both sides to see if you can cut off that spot that might not be as straight as the center of your arrow, which usually the center of your arrow is the straightest part of your arrow. Common arrow mistake building tip number 4 is the weight of your arrow. So if you're somebody who's looking for the most speed possible, you're going to look for the lightest GPI arrow, and also probably try to go about as short as possible with the weakest or higher spine to fit your setup. So when you're actually building your arrow, make sure you're taking that into account. If you're somebody who wants to be, let's say you want to end up at a 450 grain arrow, make sure you weigh your components. So your insert, whatever nock you're going to use, if you're going to use a lighted nock, if you're going to use an arrow wrap, and whatever vanes you're using, and then take into account that arrow's GPI, grains per inch, and then you can kind of calculate, okay, this arrow is going to end up at that grain that I'm looking for, so this arrow could work for my setup. That's probably going to be the easiest way to select which arrow you kind of want, and it can narrow it down to just a couple arrows pretty easily if you have a certain GPI that you are looking for, or a overall arrow weight that you're going for. So I highly recommend that you actually plan out what your arrow is going to weigh before you select that actual arrow, or the arrow that you want. Common arrow building mistake number 5, and I think this is the hardest one. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but when you are building your arrow, you want to make sure that where you cut it and also the back of your arrow, that they are both square. So I highly recommend you square both ends, But while you're doing that, if you are cutting your arrows down, make sure you're selecting that straightest part of the shaft. So if the front of the arrow is the one that has the most wobble in it, make sure you're cutting off more off the front than the back. You know, a lot of people, especially pro archers, will actually cut off the back and the front to get the center of that arrow, which should be the straightest part of the arrow. But if you find out that the back is really straight and the front's got a lot of wobble, you're probably going to want to cut more off of that front. Or vice versa, if the back's got a lot of wobble and the front is very straight, you're going to want to cut more off of the back of that arrow. So make sure you select the best part of that arrow so you get the best build possible for your arrow. And with that, I'm also going to tell you that even though it might be spine aligned, like a lot of the Victories will give you spine alignment, I would still highly recommend that you check that, because sometimes it's not always perfectly accurate. So if you have one arrow that's flying off from the others, you might want to actually put it in a press or bend that arrow before you build it, so you know which way is the stiffest part of the shaft, and you can make sure you fletch it correctly. One bonus tip that I'm going to go over here for which would be number 6, is selecting the right shaft size. So they come in 6mm, 5mm, and 4mm are the most common. There are a couple exceptions, especially if you're in a target archery, but for hunting, those are going to be the most common. 6mm is going to be your biggest, which if you're somebody who's just starting out or you're looking for a little bit more of a value arrow, the 6mm is going to be that. They do work, nothing wrong with it, but if you're somebody who's looking for a little bit more penetration, a little less wind drift, then you're going to be looking at a 5mm arrow. And those have really good components that you can get just standard with the arrows. A really good all-around solid hunting arrow. It's going to be pretty durable. And then from there you go to a 4mm. So 4mm is going to be the least amount of wind drift and also the best penetration. Some of the problems that you could run into with the 4mm arrow, especially if you're not buying aftermarket components, some of them are getting a lot better now, but the inserts or outserts, and then also some of the nocks are a little bit tougher to find better ones. So if you are going to a 4mm arrow, just make sure that you get better components, so that way it'll help strengthen up that 4mm arrow, especially for hunting. I know that there's other common arrow building mistakes. Those were just the top 5 that I could think of off the top of my head. If you found this to be helpful, please subscribe to my channel. Helps me grow and get out there to more people. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you found it to be helpful. As always, good luck out there and stay hidden.